You clicked on this video with your hand. Maybe you clicked it with your index finger. Maybe you're holding a mouse right now. It feels harmless after all, it's just a piece of plastic. 2 buttons, a scroll wheel, nothing about it looks dangerous. And yet, for millions of people, that tiny piece of plastic slowly becomes the source of an injury they don't even realize they're developing. Not in a day, not in a week, but one click at a time. The Chadstick didn't notice it either. At first, it was just a strange tingling in his fingers. Then his wrist started feeling stiff every morning. Sometimes opening a bottle felt harder than it should. Sometimes his hand would go numb for a few seconds. Nothing serious, or at least, that's what he kept telling himself. Bedia because pain gets your attention. But discomfort is easy to negotiate with. You've just been working too much. You probably slept on it. It'll be gone tomorrow. Until one morning. Tomorrow never came. Instead, he woke up and couldn't properly feel 3 of his fingers. Not because he had injured them. Not because he had broken his wrist, but because something on his desk had been quietly squeezing one of the most important nerves in his body. Every single day, and chances are, it's sitting on your desk too. The strange thing about repetitive injuries is that they almost never announce themselves. A broken bone demands attention immediately. A cut starts bleeding. A sprained ankle makes walking impossible. But repetitive strain injuries play a different game. They whisper, one tiny signal at a time. A little stiffness. A little numbness, a little weakness. Each symptom is small enough to ignore, until one day, you realize they've all been slowly adding up. The Chadstick decided to find out why. Not because the pain had become unbearable, but because something didn't make sense. Why did his wrist only hurt after long editing sessions? Why did gaming make it worse? Why were mornings always the stiffest? And why did the numbness almost always affect the same 3 fingers? The deeper he looked, the stranger the pattern became. Like most people, his first suspect was the mouse. It had to be. He spent hours holding it every day. Yeah, if something was hurting his wrist, surely the mouse was to blame. But then another question appeared. If the mouse was the problem, why do millions of people use one without developing serious pain? Why do some programmers work for decades with perfectly healthy wrists? Why do some gamers play for 10 hours straight and never experience numb fingers? The mouse couldn't be the whole story. Something else had to separate the people who developed problems from the people who didn't. So the Chadstick stopped looking at the mouse and started looking at his own hand. That's when he noticed something he had never paid attention to before. His hand wasn't resting naturally. It was twisted. Hold your hand in front of you for a second. Now imagine shaking someone's hand. Yeah, feels comfortable. Your forearm is relaxed. Nothing feels forced. Now rotate your palm until it's completely facing the floor. That's the position most traditional computer mice ask you to maintain. The movement itself doesn't hurt, in fact. It barely feels like a movement at all. But here's the important part. Your body doesn't judge movements by how dramatic they are. It judges them by how long you hold them. Standing on one leg isn't difficult until you do it for an hour. Holding a shopping bag isn't difficult until you've carried it for miles. Tiny stresses become big problems when you remove the chance to rest, and that's exactly what happens to your forearm during long computer sessions. The muscles aren't working hard, they're simply never getting a break. But twisted muscles weren't enough to explain numb fingers. Muscles get tired, nerves create numbness, which meant there had to be something happening inside the wrist itself. Imagine your wrist as a narrow tunnel. Running through that tunnel are tendons that move your fingers, blood vessels that keep your hand alive, and one incredibly important nerve called the median nerve. Think of it as the main communication cable between part of your hand and your brain. Every sensation from your thumb, your index finger, your middle finger, travels through that one narrow passage. Now imagine slowly squeezing that cable. Not enough to completely shut it off, just enough to irritate it. Hour after hour, day after day, week after week. Eventually, the messages stop traveling normally. Instead of feeling touch, you feel tingling. Instead of strength, you feel weakness. Instead of comfort, you feel numbness. The Chadstick wasn't imagining the symptoms. His body was sending warnings. He just didn't know what they meant yet. At this point, he became convinced he had tendinitis. After all, his wrist hurt. He used a computer all day. Tendinitis seemed like the obvious answer. Except, it wasn't. And this is where thousands of people accidentally make the same mistake, because wrist pain usually gets blamed on one condition, when in reality, 2 completely different injuries can feel almost identical. One is tendinitis, the other is carpal tunnel syndrome. Both can cause pain. Both can make using a computer uncomfortable. But that's where the similarities end. Tendinitis is exactly what the name suggests. The tendons become irritated after repetitive movement. Carpal tunnel syndrome has nothing to do with inflamed tendons. It's a nerve problem. specifically the median nerve being squeezed inside that narrow tunnel in your wrist. Two different injuries, two different causes, which also means two different solutions. Imagine smelling smoke in your house. One possibility is that dinner is burning. The other is that the building is on fire from the outside. Both situations look exactly the same, but treating burnt toast like a house fire would be ridiculous. And treating a nerve injury like tendon inflammation can keep people stuck for months. The Chadstick realized he couldn't fix the problem until he figured out which one he actually had. Fortunately, his own body already knew the answer. And yours might too. I want you to try something. It'll only take a minute. Hold your hands in front of you. Now press the backs of your hands together. Point your fingers downward and simply hold that position. Don't rush it, just hold it. If you've made it to 30 seconds, keep going. 40, 50, 60. Now slowly relax. Did your thumb feel different? What about your index finger or your middle finger? If you notice tingling or numbness, your body may have just revealed something important. This is called Phalen's test. It's not a diagnosis, but it's one of the simplest screening tests used when doctors suspect carpal tunnel syndrome. The Chadstick expected absolutely nothing to happen, but before the minute was over, the tingling had already started. And suddenly, this wasn't just another sore wrist. It had become a mystery, because if something inside his wrist was squeezing that nerve, what exactly was doing the squeezing? And more importantly, why was nobody talking about the real culprit? The obvious answer seemed to be the mouse. So the Chadstick did what almost everyone does. He started searching for a better one. Ergonomic mice, gaming mice, vertical mice, trackballs. Every company claimed they had solved wrist pain. But something didn't add up. Some people swore a vertical mouse completely eliminated their pain. Others said it made things even worse. How could the exact same solution create completely opposite results? Unless the mouse itself wasn't the problem, the angle was. Think back to that handshake position. Your forearm stays relaxed. Now imagine trying to shake someone's hand while slowly rotating it until your palm faces the floor. You can do it, but your forearm immediately starts carrying more tension. The movement isn't painful. The problem is that it never ends. Your body was designed for movement, not for stillness. Research has shown that during normal computer use, many people keep their wrists extended by roughly 20 degrees or more for hours at a time. Yeah, 20 degrees doesn't sound like much, until you remember you're holding that position thousands of times every week. Your wrist doesn't need a dramatic injury. It only needs a tiny amount of pressure, applied for an incredibly long time. That's what finally changed the Chadstick's perspective. His wrist wasn't being injured by one bad movement. It was being worn down by millions of perfectly ordinary ones. Naturally, this made vertical mice look like the perfect solution. Instead of forcing your palm downward, they let your hand rest in a much more natural handshake position. Less forearm rotation, less muscular effort, less pressure for many people. And for some users, that's exactly what happens. Their symptoms improve dramatically. But the story doesn't end there, because every solution has trade-offs. Many vertical mice shift much more work onto the thumb, instead of stressing the wrist. Some users begin overworking the muscles controlling the thumb. They escape one repetitive strain, only to develop another. The Chadstick realized something important. There is no magical mouse, only the mouse that matches the way your own body works. Which meant buying expensive equipment without understanding the actual injury could solve nothing, or even make things worse. So he stopped obsessing over the mouse, and started looking at something he had completely ignored, the keyboard. At first it seemed ridiculous. The keyboard barely moved. How could something so ordinary be responsible for so much pain? Then he placed his hands on the desk, without a keyboard. His wrists stayed almost perfectly straight, relaxed, comfortable. Now he placed them on a standard keyboard. Without noticing, his wrists immediately bent outward toward his little fingers. Again, it wasn't dramatic, it was subtle. But by now, the Chadstick had learned something. The body doesn't care how dramatic a position looks, it cares how long you force it to stay there. Some ergonomic studies have found that split or angled keyboards can reduce this awkward wrist position, allowing the hands to stay closer to their natural alignment. The difference isn't exciting, it isn't flashy, but sometimes the best technology doesn't add anything new. It simply stops forcing your body into unnecessary compromises. By the third week, the Chadstick stopped looking for a miracle cure, because there wasn't one. The injury hadn't been created by one mistake. It had been created by dozens of tiny ones, so the solution had to work the same way. He adjusted the position of his mouse so he wasn't constantly reaching outward. He kept his wrists as straight as possible, instead of letting them collapse onto the desk. He took short movement breaks before discomfort appeared, instead of waiting until his wrist started hurting. He stretched his fingers, rotated his wrists, opened and closed his hands between long work sessions. Not because stretching magically cures carpal tunnel, it doesn't, but because movement interrupts hours of stillness. And your joints, tendons, and muscles all benefit from regular changes in position. Little by little, the tingling became less frequent. Morning stiffness started disappearing. His grip felt stronger, not overnight, not after buying one expensive gadget, but after removing dozens of tiny stresses that had quietly accumulated every single day. Then the Chadstick noticed something that bothered him more than the pain ever had. He thought back to the very first warning sign, that tiny tingling sensation. He remembered dismissing it. It'll go away. Then came the stiffness. I've just been working too much. Then the numbness. I probably slept on it. Every warning had sounded small enough to ignore. And that's exactly why they were so dangerous. Modern life teaches us to ignore discomfort. Finish the project first. Reply to one more email. Play one more game. Watch one more video. We'll deal with our bodies later. But later has a habit of arriving all at once. Pain isn't always your enemy. More often, it's your deadline. It's your body's way of saying, I've adapted as much as I can. The next step is up to you. The strange thing about the human hand is that it's one of the greatest engineering achievements evolution has ever produced. It learned to climb trees, to throw spears, to carve wood, to paint masterpieces, to write books, to build cities. Almost every civilization in history exists because of what these hands made possible. Then within the blink of human history, we asked them to spend 8 hours every day making tiny repetitive movements across plastic and glass. The Chadstick thought his wrist was betraying him. It wasn't. His wrist was doing exactly what millions of years of evolution designed it to do. It was sending warnings. Warnings that something about the environment had changed faster than the body could adapt. The tingling wasn't random. The stiffness wasn't bad luck. The numb fingers weren't simply part of getting older. They were messages. Messages that became louder every time they were ignored. Maybe that's what makes this the real wrist time bomb. It doesn't explode the first time you use a mouse, or the 1,000th. It keeps ticking quietly in the background while life goes on. One click, one email, one game. One workday? Until eventually the damage you've been negotiating with finally demands your attention. So if your wrist has been whispering to you lately, don't wait until it has to scream.